I'm normal, you're normal, but we both want to become champions. This episode of TAP, the Athlete's Porch, number 9, is about Indiana football and Fernando Mendoza and his head coach, Curt Cignetti. We're going to tap into leadership, his journey, the ups and downs of it. We're going to talk about Stoicism. What is that, you might be thinking? I'll let you know. It's going to unlock something. I'm going to get into 5 topics, like a blueprint of what these players and this coach at Indiana, these national champions, have done that you and I can continue to build and grow ourselves just like they did. Because you're normal, I'm normal, and we're about growth here on the Athlete's Porch. We first have to understand why we play the game. And for Fernando specifically, his why is his family. And it's his mom who's sick. Because champions don't just start with ego, like I'm the best, I got this. It's about purpose. And we're going to go into that a little bit more. We're going to double click on that. He plays for the higher power, the Lord, Jesus Christ. He's consistently bringing his family on stage and praising his family. He's not embarrassed by them. He embraces that and embraces that moment because he has clarity on who he's playing for. They are there on his journey. And he openly plays for God and Jesus Christ. And let me kind of stop this and double click on this here is when we play for something bigger, and if you've been with me for the other 8 episodes, you're starting to see the trend here of what I believe in. And this is sport, and this is why we do this on the porch, to understand that we have to understand who we are and how we have to have separation. And when we play for something bigger than ourselves, say for instance, your family, say for instance, God or Jesus Christ, whatever you may believe in your religious background, something bigger than ourselves. It could even be your team. When that happens, you take the pressure off yourself. And then you start to have perspective. Perspective when you have success, perspective when you fail. It doesn't carry the weight all over your back because you're playing for something bigger than yourself. And that's why having a why is so important, is because it gives you perspective. And we're going to tap into the perspective a little bit more when we start to talk about Stoicism. Because when your why is bigger than the stats, the pressure shrinks. You become just another person on the field. Not everybody look at me, I have to perform. No. So remember when I said you're normal, I'm normal. I can't speak for you. I don't know who you are on the other side of on the screen here. But when we talk about Fernando, we're talking about a guy who was not recruited. Well, I shouldn't say not. He had one offer from Yale his senior year of high school until like winter time, January, February, when he went out for a camp at Cal, I believe how the story went, and they ended up offering him a scholarship. He redshirted his freshman year and then got to play his sophomore and junior year. He redshirted his freshman year and then he got to play his redshirt sophomore year. And he ended up having decent stats, decent numbers, and played, but 3 different offensive coordinators in 3 different years. He said, hey, let's try the transfer portal. And his brother was at Indiana already as a quarterback, and he brought him to his family. And that goes back to a point I've made multiple times here. Would you trade a redshirt year to become a national champion? Hell yes. There's only one national champion per year per sport. So would you trade a redshirt year for a first team all conference, for an all honorable mention, for an MVP type season, to sit for 2 years and then become drafted? I've talked about it before. Kyle Stowers, I coached Kyle Stowers. He's a Major League Baseball player. Coached him at Stanford University. His freshman year, he's very talented. And I've said this to him before. I've never seen anybody swing and miss on a fastball machine more than I saw Kyle Stowers swing and miss on a fastball machine his freshman fall. But his freshman year in the spring, he got to play because it was a young team and he was talented. And he hit 108 in like 50, 60 at-bats. And so here's a kid, a high, and then drops down. and he believed in the process the whole time. I remember asking him to write some reflection notes halfway through the season, and he said, this is not how I envisioned it, but this is going to help me in the long run. That's perspective. We're going to get into that even more on the Stoicism side. So your journey is your journey. You have to understand what you're doing today might not be what you want. You might not have the success you're having, but it's going to help you in the long run. Because as Fernando starts to evolve and he transfers, he starts to talk the language. And this is a section that I want to talk about, is the language and the leadership. This is how champions talk. And I'm going to spoil Curt Cignetti's section we're going to talk about, where it's all about his quotes. Cignetti was asked at his press conference when he got hired at Indiana in 2003 in December. And they said, what's your biggest challenge? And he said, to change the way people think. And it starts right there. Mendoza isn't the player he is if Cignetti comes in and does not have that message. The language was firm right out of the gate. And I want you to think about this, and this is how I talk about it with athletes, is we need to rewire ourselves. If you think negative on the field and you doubt yourself, then we need to start to rewire your brain. How do we rewire it? By building habits, by having actions. Because if you listen to all the interviews with Mendoza, they almost seem scripted, correct? Like he's been trained really well in the media. But his mind has just been rewired from the head coach. And he often uses, and this is what leaders do. You want to become more of a leader? Start to use this language a little bit more. I need to do this as well. He uses we and our a lot. When he won the Heisman, we won this trophy. This is our trophy together. I'm just one person of 22 doing my job. In order to have more success this college football playoff, I just need to do my job, and he emphasized it just like that, within the unit. Because language reveals identity, identity reveals leadership, and that leadership earns trust. And he's talking it throughout, and he's putting his players in the spotlight, the other players on the team in the spotlight, which makes them feel good. Who doesn't like to be talked about? Everybody wants to hear compliments on themselves. So when your stud quarterback is talking and giving you praise as a lineman, what do you think you're going to do next time? Try harder for that guy. That's trust. That's how champions are built. If you listen to Mendoza's Heisman speech, which is kind of where, like, for me, I became a fan because I saw his energy and his journey was laid out a little bit more. And I realized that he was normal just like myself. But he says, in his short here, this is a short section here, he says, the truth is, you don't need stars, you don't need hype, you don't need rankings. You need discipline, heart, and people who believe in you, and you must believe in yourself. Wait a second here. I've heard this before. Tom Brady last week in his Hall of Fame speech, we brought this up on the Athlete's Porch. Tom Brady in his Hall of Fame speech, he said, a section, you don't have to be special. You just have to be what most people aren't. Consistent and willing to work for it. And he goes on and says, if you look at all my teammates here tonight, they embody discipline, selflessness. Ding, ding, ding. Success leaves clues right there. That is the ability to talk the language and promote the other players. So here we are, Tom Brady, Mendoza, they're talking about this discipline, talking about belief. And this is where I want to lead into Stoicism, because Mendoza talked about Stoicism after the Rose Bowl win. Let me tell you what Stoicism is. The ancient Greek philosophy, ancient Greek and Roman philosophy focused on life by using reason to understand what the world is and control one's reactions, so a response, especially things outside of our control, cultivating inner peace, resilience, and moral excellence. And it's broke down into 4 topics, if you will: courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom. And if you see here, Ryan Holiday for me is one of my, I wouldn't necessarily call him a man crush like I did to Tom Brady, but I've listened to Ryan Holiday. I've read all of his books about Stoicism. I listen to his daily podcast. Here's a pump for Ryan Holiday. And I start my morning off in 2026. Here's a fun fact for you. I say the serenity prayer out loud. What is the serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change what I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I was in my house growing up. And it wasn't until a few months ago when I started to really dial that in. And I'm a believer in control what you can and don't worry about what's uncontrollable. Absolutely. That is a big part of the athletes and what we talk about. And the reason I'm sharing that is because Tim Tebow is essentially a mentor, a great friend to Mendoza. And Tebow, before the national championship game, got in contact with him. They said, hey, what did he say to you? Meaning, what did Tim say to Mendoza? And he said, hey, be present was the summary of it. And if you think back to Stoicism, Stoicism is about staying present. Stoicism is about controlling what you can control. Because as athletes, we overthink it, right? National championship game, you're down by 10, you're up by 10. Hey, we just needed to score one more time. And he's sitting there on the bench overthinking it. No. Be present. Be where your feet are. If you think about Cignetti's verbiage throughout, and we'll get into here in a second, is he says, we're going to play one play at a time for 6 seconds. Each and every play has its life and history of its own. And when you do that, and you play one play at a time, you become present for that play. And so let's get into Cignetti. This is where I've kind of teased you a little bit. This is where everything goes in play. You think Mendoza has great belief, he plays with great confidence, he's prepared? Absolutely. But I told you, Cignetti, when he was asked about what's the biggest challenge, changed the way people think. And he's been along some great coaches, but do you remember the quote when he said, I win, Google me? That was a month into him being hired at Indiana before they even won a game. He knew that what he believed in. Remember the Athlete's Porch episode, the inner scorecard? It was episode number 3, why the scoreboard lies and we need to believe more in ourselves and less in what other people think. That right there is what Cignetti's talking about. He's talking about understanding what he believed in. And remember, Mendoza talks about, hey, you just need somebody to believe in you. Well, when your boss and your head coach talks the language and believes, it's easy for the next leader, guy in line, to believe. And I want to share a quote with you from Cignetti, and a couple of them actually, that he says about, essentially recruiting to Indiana and what they want. He says, we want good students, strong habits, he said, life's all about choices and decisions. In life, you have freedom of choice, but not freedom of consequence. Stoicism philosophy there. And then he goes on and says, first you form your habits, then they form you. And that rung a bell for me. Okay, that triggered something mentally for me because I looked that up and I said, that sounds really familiar. And I thought that there was a proverb, an old Chinese proverb about that. I'm a big fan of habits and habit building and, atomic habits and everything. There was a quote that I dug up and it says, sow an act, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a character. Sow a character, reap a destiny. Your habits shape who you become. Simple version, because I didn't really like the flow of the sow an act, reap a habit. I didn't really process it as well. So I used ChatGPT, hey, simplify this for me, the normal folk. What you do once becomes what you do often. What you do often becomes who you are. And who you are decides how far you will go. Cignetti says, first you form your habits, then your habits form you. And this is what I'm gonna leave you with here. I'm gonna leave you with 2 more quotes from Cignetti. He says, production over potential. Production over potential. That's why their team was so old from the transfer portal. He wanted people who have produced before. And then he leaves us with a quote. He says, keep your nose down, work hard, surround yourself with right people, and anything is possible. We won a national championship at Indiana University. And that quote, remember my guy Bill Mosiello, one of my mentors, he says, Keep your nose down and work. Everything else will work out for itself. That is a universal truth. It's not just coming from Cignetti or there. The bottom line is that work wins. Talk the language. Believe in yourself. Bring your teammates up. And you and I can become champions together. I appreciate you guys tuning in to the Athlete's Porch. Subscribe right there. We'll see you next time. Let me know if you want me to talk about a certain topic or anything. Just put it in the comments. We'll talk soon.